Hey, welcome back to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay, just Jay. Thanks for checking back in with us. Okay, so I wanted to get into this because this one really lights a fire under my ass. Um, because I'm a real big Tolkien fan, real huge Tolkien fan, have been for many, many years as a kid growing up. Started playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends when we were like 12, 13 years old. And I remember very early on my parents and my parents' friends telling us, "Oh, well, if you guys are like this Dungeons and Dragons thing, you'll really like this Tolkien guy." And so they turned us on to the Tolkien books, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Fell in love, loved the whole fantasy genre. Dungeons and Dragons, Tolkien, Dragonlance, for those of you who may be fans of Dragonlance, love Dragonlance. Even going to name my first child Raceland. Um, so I love all of that fantasy stuff, Game of Thrones, House of Dragon, so on and so forth. Anyway, so one thing that I really dig is getting into the lore of certain things. Particularly if it's a really in-depth lore, like Tolkien obviously is sort of like the quintessential guide to world building that you could go to. Like his lore reaches levels of detail that are just above and beyond. But even other things like also like the Elder Scrolls. Elder Scrolls has very deep lore. They put a lot of work and a lot of effort into it, and you can read histories of histories of histories of things and stuff like that. I have some of their books, and that's what the banners that you see back here. Those are all Elder Scrolls related things. But anyway, so that's a real big thing for me is lore, and especially when you see these like television or film adaptations, for me, a make or break thing is whether or not they'll stick to the lore. And so clearly, the Rings of Power did not. And I came across an article, and I wanted to sort of point it out. It's an article in Vulture, and it's titled "The Long Road to Mordor." Or The Long Road to Mordor. The Rings of Power creators explain Sauron's identity and their plan to explore the edges of Tolkien's map. Um, I know that was really lousy acting on my part. But so I wanted to get into this because they say a couple of things which are just like flat out wrong, flat out just absolutely not true. And now I know most people who are familiar with Tolkien, if you're a fan of this stuff, you already know this. You know that the liberties they took and just the unequivocal bullshit they just created for the show. But this sort of gives you some insight into their thought process and how little they knew or that they know of the lore that's built into Tolkien's work, and or and also what little regard they have for it. And I'll point out something in this article because this really jumped out at me. Um, so they talk about Halbrand being Sauron, and being in disguise and doing the whole, you know, traveling with warrior princess Guy Ladriel. Um, and then they start Vulture starts asking them questions. So tell me about the origins of Halbrand as a character. Why introduce Sauron through the form of this human disguise? Okay. And this is what Patrick McKay, one of the showrunners and writers, had to say about this. He said, quote, one of the earliest ideas we had for the storyline came from the moment in The Fellowship of the Ring, um, when Galadriel is tempted by Frodo's offer of the ring. She talks about how well she knows and understands Sauron. And there's a quote where she says, quote, I know his mind, and he gropes ever to know mine, but still the door is shut, unquote. She clearly has a darkness that turning down the ring is a test she feels she has to pass to finally go west, and that the darkness in her is linked with her feelings about Sauron. Now, let's dissect this. Anybody who knows, if you read the Silmarillion, you know in the chapter where they talk about the rings of power, right? I think it's the rings of power and the chaining of. No, on the rings of power. Um, in that chapter of the Silmarillion, um, they explain how Galadriel knows Sauron. Um, he comes to the elves from Mordor in the guise of Anatar, um, who's this like described as a beautiful elf, male elf form, right? Um, and he's the bringer of gifts, right? That's what he does. And he comes across Galadriel and Celeborn, her husband. Um, and I'm not even going to get into how they screwed the pooch on that one with this show. But Sauron comes across as Anatar. He tries to sort of bring them under his sort of spell influence. He tries to bring Galadriel and Celeborn. Galadriel sees through him right out of the gate. Like, she's not fooled by him. She knows there's something not right with this guy. Like, she simply doesn't fall for it. And so that's when Sauron realizes it would be easier to sway Celebrimbor, right? And the elven smiths, right? So that's how Galadriel knows Sauron. Not because they hung out, not because they started to catch feels for each other when he was disguised as a man. Um, she knows him because she was already married. He approached her and her husband Celeborn, and tried to sway them and persuade them to sort of fall under his wing. Oops, sorry about that. And it failed because she could see through his bullshit. Okay, she could see him for what he really was. So that's what she's referencing when she says, "I know his mind, and he gropes ever to know mine, but still the door is shut." Because if, again, having read the Silmarillion, particularly that chapter on the Rings of Power, you know that she knew right away. She could see through the whole Anatar BS that he was pulling. And he also recognized that she was a threat to his plan. He knew that. That's why he backed away from her and Celeborn and decided to focus his persuasive energies on Celebrimbor. Okay? But clearly, the writers, Patrick McKay and whatever the other guy's name is, had no idea, because they follow it up with very early in the writer's room. We talked about how she and Sauron might have come into collision in an earlier life. Okay, we know he's a deceiver and comes in disguise. If Galadriel were to bump into him in a Tolkienian chance meeting, like, on the street or a random raft in the middle of a freaking ocean, that would be extremely unlucky for her and very lucky for him. How might he take advantage of that stroke of luck? Okay, so clearly they have no point of reference. They're saying, there was this line in Fellowship of the Rings, which kind of hints that she knows Sauron from back in a previous era. Okay, so let's just make up a story. Even though Tolkien is very explicit in explaining how she knows Sauron from a previous era. Okay, so, this whole thing about trying to stay true to Tolkien and the lore and stuff like that, yeah, not so much apparently. Um, let's see, what else do we have here in this article. I don't care about the actor knowing whether or not he was playing. Revealing Sauron at the end of the season creates a big moment for the finale, but it also keeps the big villain of the series off the table for much of the season, which is difficult for ratcheting up tension. How did you decide on the timing of the reveal? Okay, so Patrick McKay again follows up with, "We felt that season one had to be about reintroducing Middle Earth. It needed to be about the heroes, about each of these peoples and what's important to them. We didn't want the weight and complexity of evil that Sauron will come to represent to overwhelm that." All right, that's fine. That's fine. Sauron in the books comes to the elves as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. That's what I was saying before. Halbrand is never referred to by that name, though one tell of his identity early in the episode is that Celebrimbor thanks him for his gifts. Did you decide having someone call him Anatar would be too obvious? No, I guarantee you they decided having someone call him Anatar would get them sued because they didn't have the rights to use it. That's besides the point. Patrick McKay states, "We were concerned about a situation where the part of the audience steeped in lore is 6 or 7 episodes ahead of the characters. If deception is an important part of the journey, we wanted to preserve that experience for book readers too." So you completely changed Sauron's story and how he starts to influence people for the sake of the people who have read the books. Yeah, because that's basically what he's saying. He's saying we didn't want anybody know we didn't okay, they didn't want to set up a situation where people who had just watching the show or had just seen the movies were like, "Oh, how did Sauron, you know, get so powerful and stuff? And who is he? Is he the old wizard guy, the not Gandalf guy, or is he this young dude that just found Galadriel in the middle of the ocean on a raft?" And so if you just watch the show or just watch the movies, you wouldn't know because you wouldn't have any point of reference. But they also wanted to make sure that the book readers also wouldn't know. So they were just going to keep it under wraps for as long as they could to try and keep the book readers guessing. But that didn't go over well because most people had it figured out by the time they officially said it. But I just think it's funny, like for those steeped in the lore, we were concerned about a situation where the part of the audience steeped in lore is 6 or 7 episodes ahead of the characters. Oh, okay. So you wanted to subvert the expectations of people who know what the hell the story, who know how the story is supposed to be. Well, you did that. I will grant you that. You succeeded in that because you completely threw out the story the way it's supposed to be. And you just went and made shit up on your own and garbage versions. You know, so you've turned Sauron into a scorned lover. Well, not even lover. Like he's like the guy who wanted to date Galadriel, but she said no, and therefore now he's going to subjugate all of Middle Earth. That was your alternate plan. Because I like Tolkien's version better. But what do I know? But yeah, no, I just wanted to go over this because this one really gets me because, like I said, I'm really big. I like the lore. I don't know. I wouldn't say that I'm a Tolkien scholar. I wouldn't elevate myself to Tolkien scholar, but I would definitely say I could hold my own with anybody who was working on this show. I can promise you that. I can promise. Well, I would get fired just like the one person, Shippy, um, who they the Tolkien expert they did had, and they eventually let go, and it's probably because he was telling them, "You guys are screwing the lore up. You're just completely screwing the pooch on this one," and that's probably why they let him go. They won't say. There's NDAs involved, so they're not going to say what really happened. But I guarantee you that's what it came down to. He was just like, "You guys are fucking the lore on this," and they were just like, "We don't care because we just don't care." Um, but yeah, I could definitely you know hold my own with any expert these guys can put out there, because I've seen the experts in regards to this show, the Tolkien scholars that came out and said, "Oh no, it's great, it doesn't break the lore," and blah, bullcrap. When you're like splitting hairs, when you have to say, "Oh well, we can do this because Tolkien didn't say we couldn't do it," okay, that's when you know that there's a problem. Okay, when their defense is, "Well, Tolkien didn't say there weren't black elves with short fade haircuts, so therefore we can do black elves with short fade haircuts because he never explicitly said there weren't." Okay, well, technically you are correct, but he also didn't say that there weren't dolphins with laser guns that flew through the sky shooting down, hot air balloons. So are you going to put that in season 2? He didn't explicitly say those don't exist in Middle Earth. So it's just a whole lot of bullshit. But I just thought this was interesting because you can clearly see, like, the whole Sauron thing was dragged out simply because they knew that some people knew the lore and they wanted to keep them guessing as well. And this other thing with how they interpreted how Galadriel has a past with Sauron, um, which is so not what Tolkien wrote, and they just completely misinterpreted it. Um, yeah, how she and Sauron might have come into collision in an earlier life. Read the fucking book. Tolkien lays out how her and Sauron came to collision in an earlier life. It wasn't on a raft. He wasn't a human. Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna stop right there. Anyway, give me your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. Remember to subscribe, give it a like, give it a share, and I will talk to you on the next one. All right, people. Peace out.